Planet GovX is a weekly roundup of the key public sector transformation stories from around the UK and further afield, as we shine a light on what's working and build bridges between different jurisdictions to improve delivery and transform outcomes. Planet GovX is supported by Forrester, helping government organisations perform at their best.
Hello again and welcome to another episode of Planet GovX, our regular look through the world of government transformation, where I'm joined by our GM for Government, David Wilde, to take a look at the biggest stories of the last couple of weeks, what's happening, what it means for people that work in the public sector, what it means for the rest of us in terms of impact on citizens. Those of you that watch the YouTube version of this, I've been told I need to look a bit more cheerful while I'm listening to David wax lyrical. So look out for a few more inane grins as I try to keep up the smile factor. Other than that, nothing else to say other than let's dive in, and I'll be back at the end to say goodbye. So I want to have a look at, it's actually related to an infographic we put out earlier this week, and you and I had a couple of conversations around the future of data in government. I think we're of the view that the debate around the technology and the interoperability and cloud and stuff, we've moved past that, or albeit some organizations are still catching up. But I think the argument's been won very convincingly by people like you advocating cloud for donkey's years. So now we're at the point where we can actually start to harness the power of some of this data. We've got data sets floating around all over the place, but now we can start to bring them together, overlay them, look for some meaningful patterns, which sounds exciting. So I'm kind of curious, for you, what's the big opportunity around government data? What are the kind of uses and examples that are exciting you that we think everybody out there listening should be really trying to get to grips with and harness themselves?
Big one for me, I think, is going to be economic recovery. It's got to be the big ticket item for the next 2 years because we are in a very deep hole. And there is data, I think, is absolutely the heart of how economic recovery can be the bounce back that the government really wants, or will end up being a long and painful journey that we suffered through the 80s. Let's not have the latter, let's try and have the former. So use the data we've got out there to intelligently plan where we want to attract new industry, where we want to reskill people, embrace and accept the fact that retail has changed and have a look at what's going to be different to create new jobs for young people going forward. Data should be able to tell us what we can target where at a hyper-local level, work with local government to make it happen, and work with businesses. And if we use it, we can get much more intelligent around what kind of incentives you put in place to attract particular kind of businesses, what kind of skills we need to grow in particular geographies so that businesses don't go away or don't fold through lack of talent and capability. So I think that's the big one for me. I think let's not, repeat what we've said previously around health. I think that pretty much stands on its own, and COVID and all the rest of it. But yeah, definitely economic growth, jobs, opportunity.
Yeah, and for me, we've talked a lot before about the sort of overlaying of data sets to provide these new insights, whether that's sort of local plans, whether that's sort of interventions in sort of social problems and stuff, so where you can start to map this environmental, social, employment, education, all of this stuff to build up these kind of nuanced pictures of the places we're dealing with. That's the kind of
and local plans should not just be about housing. They must be about quality of life. It's got to be about economic growth, hand in hand. And we get too often, we hear in planning the focus about how many houses you need in a place. Houses are a small part of the story, right? Complex data sets can actually give you something that it's not as if we haven't done it in the past. I mean, this is where the likes of Milton Keynes came to be and all the rest of it. But actually, we could do it so much better now because the tech we've got and the quality of data, the quantity of data, and I think the maturity we have around ethical data use means we should be able to do this so much better now.
Yeah, sounds like the exciting pieces around the scale of the deployment. I mean, I think you can see how you can use a data set for a very tactical piece of discrete work around a particular problem. But what you're advocating is really kind of opening up the scale and ambition almost around how we're going to use data to solve these big, macro problems or macro challenges. macro opportunities to really start to harness the power of this stuff. So, I mean, how far away are we from this stuff? It's going on in pockets, but
I think it's already happening at a national scale. We just don't. We're not public enough about it sometimes. And the one that still holds true for me is one we talked about previously. Neighbourhood renewal started, under a Labour administration back in 97, 98, and has followed through coalition governments and Conservative administrations. So it's transcended politics in recognition of the fact that putting the time and effort in through good data and analytics to understand where our most deprived communities are, and then work over 25 years to do something about it. That for me is big data and big analytics in action.
So next up, we have New York City has unveiled its first ever citywide IoT strategy. We were lucky to have New York's CTO, John Paul Farmer, join us in November at the last conference. And I was fascinated by what he said. I mean, he spoke as a CTO and barely mentioned technology. It was about people, it was about equity, it was about fairness and smart cities and enabling that. So this is their first attempt at an IoT, Internet of Things, for those that don't know the acronym, but probably should by now. So what do you make of it? It's ambitious, and is it something that everyone else should be trying to emulate?
Yeah, good. So it was great when we had that conversation with John Paul back at the time. He was, what was really refreshing about the fact was the point you made was that it was about people, it was about business, it was about getting around the city and how much cleaner and easier we can make that for everybody. And I think the IoT strategy that they've published is continuing to live that approach, and it's the right approach. It's not about the widgets. The widgets do what they do. It's about how you deploy them and how you use them to actually shape and change the way that your city can operate. I think their ambition is very, very clear about reduce pollution. Of course, it's a city, wouldn't you expect anything else? Improve travel. Let's get into that 10, 15, 20-minute city conversation, because that's absolutely where John Paul is, and it absolutely comes through on that IoT piece. So it isn't about things in isolation, it is about the city as a whole and how to marry up how IoT can help that city breathe and run and operate and play faster than it does today. Excellent, love it.
It's almost as if there's a theme here, which is if you join stuff up, things work better.
Bigger, hey?
Yeah. The fog is lifted, and yeah, I mean, I guess the question, if we're looking to the closer to home, is do any other cities have a similar level of ambition in the UK? I mean, there's lots of initiatives, there's lots of projects around, but has anyone kind of pulled it all together in this kind of way? And is this kind of required reading for a lot of sort of CTOs and CIOs in our big sort of metropolitan centres that they could take a similar level of ambition and give it a go?
Yeah, I think we should learn, we should share. I think the kind of material we've seen coming out of London, I think is a little bit too tactical compared to the New York one. I like the simplicity of what John Paul's come out with. And if we compare and contrast, we've got the Open Innovation Challenge Programme, which is also on your list, right? So let's pick that one up while we're at it, shall we?
Yeah.
And what I saw there was a reach out to industry and a reach out to organisations and reach out to Londoners to tell us what you think you can do and some great innovations. What I didn't get was, which I got from the New York one, was I get that engagement and all that kind of stuff, but how ambitious are you being really? And John Paul's kind of the document, it's not John Paul's document, it's New York's document, but New York's document and ambition is unequivocal about what they want to achieve. So let's step up to that level and kind of work. Ours is more British, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I got that.
And a little bit of American more up front there might not be a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I read it too. The Mayor of London's program. What do we call it? Open Innovation Challenge program. And it's nice. I like the sentiment. I like the idea, but it's small in scale. It's not got a huge budget behind it potentially. We'll see. It's early days. It's a call for submissions. It's trying to tackle some knotty problems. What have we got? Yeah, so there's helping Londoners to do good work, building strong communities, and a Green New Deal and high streets for all. And The underlying principles all sound great, putting Londoners at the centre, shifting power and putting control of projects in the hands of the users and organisations that are closest, creating connections across the city, across the boroughs and outside the city. This is all good stuff. But I guess,
where's the 20-minute ambition?
yeah, true.
Where's the
I mean,
30-minute ambition? Could it step up? You know,
yeah, maybe be more prescriptive and saying this is a specific goal. I think the outcomes that it's seeking are quite kind of broad, maybe, and maybe they're looking for the submissions and solutions to sort of shape those outcomes to some degree. But also I think in being more definitive and saying this is our ambition for X, Y, and Z, I think you focus the attention, you focus people's minds, and you can drill into maybe some more specific outcomes, and really, be prescriptive and set the vision and direction more specifically.
Yeah, and I think global cities generally need to be doing that. I mean, it's, New York have set their stall out and they're aiming high and they're being quite, ambitious, and they're thinking, but that's right. That's what global cities have to do. Global cities compete with each other.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. London doesn't compete with Manchester. London competes with New York. That's the reality of what we're operating at. So the sense of ambition needs to be at that global standard and kind of push that through. So that's what I'd like to see more of coming out in that space.
Yeah.
But hey, we've got London mayoral elections shortly, so let's see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, whatever happens in that, we need these kind of ambitious projects to stick. It's not a case of this is a techie mayor, this is a non-techie mayor. It's all got to be part of the mix constantly. We need to empower our CIOs, we need to empower our CTOs in the public sector to drive this stuff, regardless of who's in the main office. And we've had some conversations recently that's definitely happening. We've had some really good examples of projects that are going on. So we just need to scale out really. And I think that idea sharing and that sort of celebrating the successes, which we're trying to do here obviously as well, then that's a massive part of it.
I mean, there are some examples where they have on a smaller scale in the cities, in the UK, Sunderland, doing some, they've always been out there going, we are going to make our city, as future fit as we possibly can. And of course, there was the recent announcement, I think in the last week or two, around the big IoT initiative up there working with Nissan. On autonomous vehicles. So that kind of ambition, we can bring out. But London, do more of that and do it big.
Be bold, be ambitious, see what resources and relationships you've got on your doorstep, which is what Sunderland have been smart at, right? We've got a big Nissan plant there. Let's see what we can do with them and see what they can, how we can, harness the power of that big company to drive some, public sector innovation.
Excuse the drive pun, hey?
Yeah. So next up, David, I've got one of your favorite topics, which is agile government. Now, before you start, I'm just gonna tee this up for you before you start ranting. We had a really interesting session back in November around agile government, and we've pushed out some of the key findings and the key takeaways. And we had a fantastic panel. We had Sally Meacham, who's the CEO for Centre for Digital Public Services Wales. We had Terry Makewell, who's the CTO at the UK Hydrographic Office. Catherine Benjamin from the aforementioned Mayor's Office of the CTO in New York. And we had also Brett Gibson from Domo, so cloud experts and data experts there as well. Yeah. And it was interesting because there's big A and small a agile, and people potentially interchange those terms in a slightly unhelpful way, don't quite get it. It's not just doing things a bit quicker. It's not just doing the same stuff with a bit of digital flavoring smattered over the top. So come on, both barrels, tell me, agile government, what is it really? Is it happening? And what do we need to do to do it properly?
Yeah, and it will reflect on something else, which is around the shared services piece and the Darlington campus. All these kind of come into the mix around this. And I think, back to my usual mantra around this, remember where agile came from and what it was for. It was for designing software, right? It wasn't for reshaping society. So be careful how we use it. And the infographic we've got on it, always the one thing I always look for, which is the big challenge on agile, scale up. You can be as agile as you like, but if you can't scale it up at the end, it's just another pilot.
Yeah.
So I still hold that challenge out there for everybody doing agile. When you're doing agile, Are you doing it and tracking it and building it in a way that you can then multiply it 1,000 times over, make it 150 times bigger, and make it stick?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, you're playing.
Yeah.
So that challenge from me to anybody in the agile world is be clear about that, and they're very clear about that actually in the agile methodologies that they, you know, that was born in 99 2000. It was about making sure with agile, whilst you can do all that great stuff, you still need the underlying discipline to be able to then take all of that thinking and all of that work that you do and all the show and tell and turn it into a product you can scale, sustain, and in that particular case, generate significant revenue from and profit. That's what it was all about. And you play that into the agile government thinking, you know, to do a project in agile that doesn't scale is not good. You need to have that scaling piece and that understanding about what would be required to make it work in a demography of 10 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in a project of 200.
Yeah. Yeah. And it reminds me of one of my sort of favorite expressions. I don't know who coined it, but it's innovation theatre, and this idea that you have this project that everybody gathers around in a big circle and watches it and feels all warm and fuzzy about it. Isn't that good? And isn't that exciting? And then the performance ends and everyone goes away, and the next morning they vaguely remember they saw this play last night, but they go about business as usual, and the learning's gone, and it's not kind of paying out in terms of its benefits and impact more widely. So
exactly, you know, and we've seen some examples of that come through in you know, people have talked about agile, you know, IT. We've seen what's happened with GovVerify. But there are success stories where the discipline has been applied, you know, has been applied, and it has worked through. So, you know, GovNotify, similar methodology. So these are good. So there are good and bad in the GDS world where they've done a lot of this stuff. My plea is focus on what made the good and understand what made it not work, and you know, apply those disciplines. And time again, I've spoken with countless people that work in banking and other areas where they've said where agile has succeeded, and this is one for you. One particular large financial institution, big retail institution I dealt with, said we had the playground, that was agile, and then we had the grown-ups room, which is where the old IT guys were. So what they did was they waited till the playground had got to a point, and then they took the toys away, and then they put them into grown-up toys. So
there's a cultural piece around this as well.
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to be disparaging about it. I'm not being disparaging deliberately, but their point was that there is a point through which you need to go from that iterative and from that experimental into industrial. Yeah, and it's understanding that transition is one of the big conundrums, I think, around this whole methodology and this whole approach. Yeah.
So I'd recommend everybody at home, I'll put the link in the show notes, go and check out that on-demand session from the guys back in November, because really good practical stuff, a bit like you talking about the realities of it, not the concept of it, about making it stick and what you want to do and how you're going to manage cultural change around, you know, using agile methodology and so on. So worth checking out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, recognize it as a methodology, recognize its value in that context. Don't treat it as a religion. It's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, we've not spoken before. This is a story I did a couple of weeks back, but it hasn't happened yet, so it's still current, which is, so HM Treasury have been mooting this sort of northern campus for a while. Yeah. And they've recently announced that they've chosen Darlington. There were a couple of other places in the running. There was Leeds and Newcastle, and both those cities were pretty excited about this possibility. So when the Darlington announcement came out, there were people raised a couple of eyebrows around, well, does it have the infrastructure or the talent pool or what have you to sort of cope with this? Now, it's a modern world, and we're a pretty small island, so this idea, it's not out in the back of beyond. It's pretty close to some other places. So a couple of things that are interesting here is the ambition has been there for a while to sort of de-Whitehall-ize, which is not really a word, but you get my point, the civil service, and where we can to look for opportunities to move out of London to different parts of the country. It's a good thing to do, sort of in terms of the signal it sends to the rest of the country that you know, UK government isn't London centric. And then also it brings in different ideas, it brings in a different talent pool, it potentially has a more diverse, cognitive range, if you want to call it that. People think differently in different places potentially. So what's your take on it? How does this move sort of stack up? It's been going on for a while. And then how do we make it work? Because that's the big thing. It's not just virtue signaling, it's got to deliver impact, right?
Yeah, it has, and we did a previous session, didn't we, around one of the big things for me around this is long-term planning to make it stick. Back to the sticking question again. And what was really interesting about both that announcement, of course, has previously been the Wolverhampton announcement from Generic, about part of communities and local government moving into Wolverhampton. So there's a bit of it, in the mix. And I think there's a clear distinction that needs to be made around this, which is this just moving some bodies to keep some people quiet, or is this going to be a sustained relocation of how the machinery of government works? And two people far more esteemed than me really sort of flagged this and threw some very hard questions back to government this week. Lord Heseltine and Bob Kerslake, Lord Kerslake now I think he is, both called out that key question, which is moving Whitehall doesn't change Whitehall.
Yeah.
And both of them flagged up that if you're going to do this, you need to plan for the longer term, and you need to move and create the ability within those destinations to fill those jobs as people retire and move on. So, and that was the success story I think I mentioned previously. Sheffield's success story was they achieved that, and a city with 2 universities and also with excellent further education and actually good education generally was going to achieve that. Darlington has that potential. There's a lot of excellent, further and higher education facilities up there. And actually, there is a pretty big civil service footprint already just up the road in Washington, just outside Newcastle. It's where most
what's up there?
DWP and HMRC have huge data centers up there and a lot of IT people.
Okay.
And they have done since the 60s. So there is actually a lot of civil service up there. And of course, HMRC, Treasury, they're part of the same sort of ecosystem. And actually DWP is in a kind of weird way with Treasury. DWP spends it all, Treasury collects it all. So
keep an eye on each other.
Yeah, exactly. So Darlington isn't as mad as it sounds, because it is going into an ecosystem that's not unfamiliar.
Yeah, and it's commutable from Newcastle and Sunderland, and it's not.
Oh, absolutely. And there is another big bit of former civil service that's up there as well. That's where the Teachers' Pension Agency is. It's where civil service pensions used to operate from. So Darlington isn't new in this, but it's creating more jobs. But back to again what both Heseltine and both Heseltine and Kerslake made a really clear point on is this will only work if you're willing to change culture in Whitehall to make it stick. And also you're going to invest in those areas to create the capability for that to succeed in the medium to long term.
How many times in our conversation today we talked about this long-term view? I mean, it's the ball game, right? You can amp up in the short term and sort of get something moving, but for it to naturally and organically take hold and work properly, you've got to have that long-term plan of how you sustain it with the resources, with the people, with the education. All that stuff's got to be built into it.
And back to our earlier point, it's going to have to transcend administrations. It's going to have to not be political, right? Because the colours, governments will change. So what you don't want is people moving chess pieces around the board when you have a change of administration. So it's something that needs to transcend that political kind of landscape as well, which I think is going to be quite important. So there's all that, and the other piece which I saw a lot of from my time when I was in Sheffield. I told you before, I was relocated to Sheffield, and then I was relocated to London 5 years later. So it's about making sure that doesn't happen. With those roles. And equally, what you don't want is you don't want half the civil service spending half their time on trains going back and forth, even if it is HS2. What you don't want is on the one hand, moving the civil service to some place only for half the people you move there to be spending half their time coming to London to meet people.
To find their minister who is still down there. Yeah, that's a real risk. So last one for you today, David. We've just seen the release of the Government Business Services Shared Services Strategy. Now, it doesn't sound terribly exciting on the outside, but it's basically built around different work streams to create transformation, interoperability, improving back office processes, and better value for money in Whitehall. So if it's going to get to grips with those issues, then this is a big piece of work and it's significant. You've had a quick read of it. What do you make of it? What are your thoughts on whether this is a game changer or if it's an exercise, a retread of sort of an ambition and an exercise that's been done before? What do you think?
I'm a bit cynical about this one, I'm afraid. I'll give you a couple of reasons. The first one, when I read through it, I found it fascinating to read that there were a lot of boxes with shared service, and then there was one box called HMRC. So it read to me like shared services excluding HMRC, which is, I think, about a quarter of the civil service, or possibly as much as a third. So that's a big lump to park to one side and not deal with. The second thing, which I think is far more serious, actually, that's a bit flippant, but actually you do have to beg the question. If you talk shared services and then stick a Whitehall department of that size and complexity in a box on its own, you're kind of thinking, right, how serious is this? The second thing is look at local government. Local government's been through this, and they've been through it in the last 10 years, and most shared services are being dismantled. Yeah.
Right.
And the reason they're being dismantled is because actually technology's overtaken the need. And let me explain a bit further. So, big driver behind shared services was around consolidating back office. That was the main driver around shared service, right? We're all familiar with that. So, shared HR, shared IT, shared finance, processing kind of stuff. And as I say, local government went through that. Certainly over the last 20 years, a lot of shared services were created. Tri-boroughs in London, two lots of tri-boroughs actually. You had Westminster, Kensington and Chelsea, and Hammersmith and Fulham, where I did the business case for IT on that one back in the day. And you also had Camden, Islington and Haringey, and there were others, Brent, Southwark and Lewisham. So there were a variety in London, and they've all pretty much unravelled. Yeah, to a great extent. LGSS, which was the big Northamptonshire shared service, has gone. Yeah, there are a few dotted around that tend to be more focused on geography and agencies in a geography. So they work more because of the geography of where they're at, rather than providing economies of scale. Yeah, so my point about it, why they've been dismantled, is HR shared service nowadays with technology, it's self-service, it's not shared service anymore. Employees and managers do it themselves, and you have a very small HR function. Yeah, most private sector went down this road donkeys years ago. You get your own payslip electronically, all that, right? And the same goes for finance. Most of what was required in a shared service has been automated. So you don't have these big entities. The last bastion around this was IT, and of course with the advent of Windows 10 and what we've actually seen around COVID, but actually it was happening before that, is IT has become commoditized to an extent where you don't need large numbers of technical experts anymore. If your computer goes wrong, you hot swap it for another one and somebody fixes it and gives it to somebody else down the line. You don't take it away and try and fix it on scene anymore. They work. The stuff works. Cloud is wiping out data centers. So the arguments for shared services have been heavily diminished.
So how have this very smart people in government business services, so how have they arrived at this shared services idea now, when potentially the evidence elsewhere is a move away from that? So what do you think the thinking is?
Well, that's what's baffled me a bit, and it might be symptomatic of our earlier conversation around Whitehall and agile government, funnily enough, which is is this next iteration of shared services another attempt to knock down the walls between the organisations? But then I'll come back to my earlier point. There is a great big fortress called HMRC that's sitting on all those future state shared services in splendid isolation. So this is why I'm a bit cynical about it. What is the driver here? Is the driver here purely on efficiency? Well, I would ask them, I would say to them, look to what's happened already, and is efficiency actually around just embracing consumerization and commoditization of those services as they are now and shifting behaviors? Yeah. So that's my first challenge. My second challenge is, if it is about dealing with silos and culture change, look at culture change rather than looking at restacking the deck chairs. Yeah, and I think that for me are kind of my questions around it.
So there we go, episode done. Thanks to David for joining me as ever. I've left my desk behind to unwind in the delights of the Essex countryside after a long day. Make sure you're doing the same. Don't let that mental health suffer. Also, head over to our online content platform at govx.digital. You can check out the latest blogs, articles, infographics, opinion pieces, podcast episodes, all of that good stuff that we're putting out right now to keep you abreast of the world of government transformation. Also, don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel to subscribe to the podcast there. Go to your favourite podcast platform, Spotify, Google, whichever it might be, and register there to subscribe and never miss out on another episode. That's about it from me. I'm going to head off, enjoy a walk, and then be back fighting fit next week for some more great content with the GovX Digital team. Until then, bye-bye.